Welcome back on the second part of our two-part episode where I am joined by Phil Mitchell, a licensed clinical therapist in the UK. We have been diving deep into how gender bias disadvantages men, especially male victims, in today's society. On this episode, we are taking a closer look at false accusations and how it affects men. We are also looking at how it is being reported and communicated to the masses. We are also critiquing the latest release of Unreliable Witness by Sky News in regards to Eleanor Williams, a woman that was found guilty of perverting the course of justice. Welcome back to another episode of Heinz Griff, and this is The Griff. You mentioned false accusations earlier, and that is something that definitely happened in the case of Eleanor Williams, which is something that we're also gonna talk about today. And that case is really harrowing. For those that don't know, she was found guilty of perverting the course of justice, serving 8 years in prison. Most likely gonna get out in 5 for good behavior or whatever. But she got 8-year sentence, and essentially she was found to have been fabricating Snapchat messages, and she was also found on CCTV to have bought equipment to hit herself and basically harm herself, and went online to post and say that she was being groomed.
Injured and seemingly drugged, she makes more claims of being trafficked. But CCTV shows us what really happened. Just a few hours earlier, a chance meeting with an innocent man. These pictures show the pair met when he asks for a lighter. It's Williams who pursues a conversation. She then travelled from Preston, where the encounter had taken place, back to Barrow-in-Furness. This is Williams walking home with no visible injuries.
Yes, we'll get you an ambulance.
But just 20 minutes later, when police arrive at her flat, this is what they see. She's taken to hospital, but a judge would later say that the injuries were self-inflicted and that she was play acting.
Everyone believed it. There was a whole wide campaign in regards to this. But what ended up happening after her verdict was something that was completely different that I never saw coming, by the way. And it was where some were saying that we shouldn't use it to basically dismiss real victims of abuse, etc. What do you think about that?
I agree with that. I don't think we should use what Eleanor Williams did to use that as a template to say this is what all victims, male and female, are like. And at the same time, I don't think we should completely ignore it and say that every single person, or imply that every single person who makes an allegation is telling the truth. So when I started in my full-time private practice, I was predominantly working with boys and men and all that, I found that I ended up working with, just sort of happened naturally, boys and men that had been sexually abused and or physically abused, and some of them had also been falsely accused of abuse by the person who abused them. And so sometimes some people, in my view, naively want to separate false allegations, put that over there, and actual allegations of sexual and physical abuse, put that over there. They're separate. Well, they're not always separate. The person who can physically abuse you, sexually abuse you, can sometimes also falsely accuse you as a way of manipulating reality and making themselves look like the victim and the perpetrator. I don't, it's really, really tricky. So as a therapist, from my point of view, if someone sits down in front of me and says, I was sexually abused a few years ago and I need some help dealing with it, well, I work with that and I believe that. If someone sits down in front of me and says, I was falsely accused of something a few years ago and I need help dealing with that, I'll believe that. But I'm not the police. And from a police point of view, due process matters. And what's really, really interesting is that Eleanor Williams went online. She made this statement, and within days, there was mass support for her. Mass support. She was automatically believed, and, there was lots of stuff going on. Now, again, to me, that's power and that's influence, right? But what we should never, ever do is from a police point of view, is assume that every single person who makes an allegation is always 100%, always, definitely without any shadow of a doubt, definitely telling the truth. What the police should do is take the allegation seriously and investigate. That's not necessarily the same as blindly believing. I've worked with, and I would never have said this 5 or 6 years ago, but I've worked with far too many boys and men who've been falsely accused of all sorts of abuse, who've tried to take their own life, whose lives have been absolutely devastated because of these false allegations, some of which were proven to be malicious false allegations, but many of them, the police explicitly said, we're not going to go forward with this because we're worried it might put genuine victims off reporting. And a few police officers and ex-police officers I've spoken to, they've said in confidence to me that, again, and I've got permission to share this, just not their names, but they've kind of said, yeah, you know, when I was in the police or I'm in the police, we know that a percentage of allegations of various forms of domestic abuse, etc., they are false, but we are discouraged from prosecuting and going further with it because it might put genuine victims off. So the bottom line seems to be that men who are falsely accused are the acceptable collateral damage. That's absolutely abhorrent. How on earth can we be okay with that? It's absolutely shocking. If they didn't take women seriously, we wouldn't see all the headlines that we have every single week. We wouldn't see all the news articles. We wouldn't see all the policies, the procedures, the initiatives that come from government. We wouldn't see the women's organisations and charities getting the funding that they do. We wouldn't see the issues affecting women and female victims being focused on so intensely as we do in the media. That all of that really doesn't support the claim that women are not being taken seriously. And maybe they're not being taken as seriously as they could be. Yes, there are certainly issues that affect girls and women that need addressing and they need attention. But as I've said, that doesn't mean we should keep male victims and boys and men in the dark, I think, as we often do. All crimes reported to the police should be responded to, generally speaking, seriously. They need to be looked at, taken seriously and investigated, no matter what the crime is or no matter who it is. And then if through that there is information that is being discovered that suggests the person is or may be lying, that should not be quickly highlighted and then I know someone who was I won't go through the details, but he was falsely accused. He told them, there would be CCTV, there'd be this, there'd be all this evidence that would invalidate the false accuser's claim. They looked into it and it was there and it totally invalidated her claim. And basically they said to her, you need to drop the charges or we will come after you for perverting the course of justice. So she, of course, dropped the charges, but then she's then telling all her friends, he did do this, the police didn't support me. So whilst there's no legal involvement, his life is still hell. And so my view in that case is they should not have given her the option to say, you need to drop the charges or we will come after you. And I think, so there's all sorts of problems. This comes back to men being the acceptable collateral damage. I think that issues around sexual abuse, any sorts of sexual abuse, yes, it's very controversial. Nothing's perfect at all. And I have no problem in, the media highlighting issues affecting girls and women. I think they do it sometimes in a way that might be fear-mongering and increasing fear rather than anything else. The problem I do have is the comparative silence when it comes to addressing issues affecting men. And I think, you talked about how women don't disclose a lot. Well, if you look at years worth of data and research, we know that, male victims from the research report a lot less than female victims. And so the question that it leaves me with is, well, what are we doing as government, as society, as media to try and encourage more men to come forward? And the answer, in my view, is absolutely nothing. We're too busy putting focus into the men perpetrators, women victims narrative. That's what we're doing. And so, so years ago when I was running the Child Sexual Exploitation Service for Boys, the 2009 guidance that we had at the time addressing sexual exploitation looked at, it was better than what we've got now, but it basically said, don't forget boys and young men, they can experience child sexual exploitation too. What are the issues facing boys and young men? Remember, they can be victims as well. Fast forward over 10 years later, the current guidance and lots of other government documents that we have, we focus on boys and men predominantly as perpetrators, not as victims. And so for me, I'm thinking, well, if we've known for years that they are disclosing a lot less, why are we doing absolutely nothing to encourage them to talk and disclose their abuse, which, based on perceptions perhaps around masculinity, wanting to look after your female perpetrator, fear of your masculinity being threatened, children being involved, loads of other dynamics will affect the rates at which they do or don't disclose. So why aren't we tackling that? And the reason we're not tackling it is because we live in a society that cares a lot more about women and a lot less about men.
I listened to the podcast called Unreliable Witness. And that podcast, I would have rather go to a dentist or spend time with a bear than actually listen to this podcast because it was quite honestly shocking. Basically, they frame Eleanor Williams to be someone that was actually the victim in all of this.
But this was one of the frustrating aspects of what we heard in court, or rather what we didn't hear. I pressed Doug Marshall on why Ellie Williams' mental state wasn't a bigger issue.
And they kind of, and this is my own personal opinion here, everyone, I'm going to link the podcast below anyway so you can go listen for yourself. I'm also going to link the BBC investigation as well for completeness. But the point is, in that particular podcast, they brought out info to basically say that Eleanor Williams was also in another case, I think it was episode 4, that she was in another case that she was seen as a credible victim and she was actually giving evidence.
So here we are. We've identified 3 men who Eleanor Williams made complaints about, who have had allegations made against them by other women. Eleanor wasn't accused of perverting the course of justice against any of them. Why not?
To me, this was striking. This was concerning for me because, well, that's how the justice system is meant to work. You're not supposed to take one case and put it against someone else. But not everyone understands that. It's completely false in its premise because Eleanor Williams, in the case that they were even trying to say, oh, she was found, to perverting course of justice, she actually did do this. She actually did fabricate messages. There was proof of this. They've shown it. But in another case, there was no proof of that. So, of course, you got 2 things that can exist. She can be a victim of a grooming gang, and she can also use the fact that she was the victim of a grooming gang to inflict harm on somebody else. So,
and that, exactly.
So the reason why I brought this up is because I want to really understand why are the media focusing on the angle that women are being disadvantaged, even in a case where it's so credible that it was clear cut, it was all of this thing, but they always switch it to this is the bigger message. It's gonna disadvantage. Why are they focusing on that?
I think I've kind of said it already. I think it's because we live in a society that cares a lot more about women and a lot less about men, and because of that, we cannot at all be seen to be caring about male victims as much as female victims, and we cannot be seen to be saying, look at the harm women do compared to the harm men do. And so I listened to the podcast, and some of it's quite interesting, but certainly towards the last sort of 2 or 3 episodes, I just thought they are just desperately trying to garner sympathy for this person who has falsely accused these men. And I think when they were saying, oh yes, but some of these men have got possible connections to other men who may have abused Ellie. And again, if that's the case, as you say, then if she's a victim, she needs support, she needs justice, and those men need dealing with, and they need to face justice. It goes without a doubt. It in absolutely no way invalidates the horrific traumatic harm that she perpetrated against these men, some who tried to kill themselves. And that is the difference. As soon as a spotlight is on you as I'm a victim of abuse, you get love, you get support, you get acceptance. You get Tommy Robinson, for crying out loud, running all over the place, doing whatever. There is this huge, you get the police involved. On average, I'm not saying that's the case in all cases, but on average you get that. Those who are victims of false accusations don't get that support. There are less support services, there is less funding, you're still treated with a lot more suspicion. And so there's a real problem here. But I think, for me, the podcast is interesting because if Eleanor Williams had been a young man and a young man had done what she had done to young women, the actual Unreliable Witness podcast by Sky, I think it adopted a very different narrative. From the data that we do have and from the research that's out there, and there isn't a lot on it, and we could probably do with more research, and some of it are very consistent findings, but from the research, certainly what I've read, it's because false allegations, certainly of abuse, but again, there's other false allegations, false allegations of sexual harassment, false allegations of sexual harassment in the workplace, false allegations in the family court, So if we talk about false allegations of various forms of abuse, from the data that is available in the research, they affect men more than women. And anything that affects men more than women, we don't want to look at. Because if we are peddling this narrative that, actually, men have got some pretty bad stuff going on as well, and let's kind of give that some attention, the amount of criticism you get just for doing that, there are plenty of issues that uniquely affect men. As I said earlier on, paternity fraud, you've got, forced parent conception by deception. We don't talk about it. And what we do is, it hardly happens. Well, how do we know that? Where's the data? Where's the information? You can't say it hardly happens. And when it comes to false allegations of abuse, sexual harassment, etc., it generally sits, as you said earlier on, under the legislation of perverting the course of justice. Well, there are so many individual specific lies that could come under that heading. Well, how many of the incidents of perverting the course of justice are actually false allegations of abuse? We don't know. And I think there is that whole, well, hang on a minute, if every single false allegation that's proven, and it's really, really tricky because sometimes we can't prove it, it's just basically one person's word against another. Does it mean that the guy who committed rape did it and he's going to get away with it? Does it mean that the victim has lied and she gets away with it? We sometimes you just don't know.
Reasonable doubt is a high standard. People need to understand that, yeah.
Exactly. But where it's proven that it was a malicious, proven false allegation, too many of them are not being logged officially. But even when they are logged officially, they're logged under perverting the course of justice. So how many of them? And so it becomes a real problem. So the answer to your question is, why don't we want to do it? I think we'd rather have a society that I think says abuse is rife than false allegations are rife. Whereas I think we should be promoting more accuracy and saying, well, actually, this is what the data and what we know about abuse, this is what we know about false allegations. So the common narrative is it's only 2%. Well, no, it's only 2% from what police officers and the CPS are deciding to record officially. How many false allegations that the police know about, and that's before we talk about false allegations of sexual harassment in the work and things like that, and things that go on in schools and all of that, how many of them, if they were all known and recorded, what would the data look like? And the bottom line is, there are people who have a vested interest in making sure that that information does not get out there, because it gives you a more accurate picture. And it's a more accurate picture that says men are disproportionately facing these false allegations. And we go, no, we don't want that. We want it to be shown that women are the ones that are suffering, because if that's the case, then we can get the funding, we can get the influence, and then we can use that to poorly justify hating men.
I can see where you're coming from, because in every case of looking into perverting the course of justice, there is so many cases under that. I mean, there is a case of, I'm not sure if you've heard of this case, but it's Ryan Kerrison and Kirsty Barr case. He basically accused him of domestic violence. he went to prison, and he basically told his story. And like you said, she was being recorded under perverting the course of justice. Other cases as well, where an Essex woman that literally had accused men, of raping her, and it turned out to be false. Again, perverting the course of justice. She went to prison. To go back to your story, even the guy that was saying, I don't want to have sex, for example, I don't want to have sex, etc. And the girl was like, I see you want to have sex, your pee-pee is up, or whatever. And he was still saying no, etc. Under the law, it's actually codified as you need to have a penis. Like, for to be of, you need to have a penis. The reason why I'm bringing up this point is, when you look at these systemic injustice, there has to be a reason other than they just hating men. Why do you think that there is no vested interest to reform this particular law?
The narrative is often, oh, well, did you know that 99.9% of rapists are men? Well, yeah, that's because the offence is legally worded in such a way which means that the offence can only be committed by a penis. The other 1% or 0.1% of women under that, if I've understood this correctly, is women where they aid in the of somebody else. They come under that. But even then, it's still the vast majority is men. But it's not because men are being abusive and women aren't. It's because there's a specific law which means that it can only be perpetrated by a penis. So if you're going to kind of put this message out there, don't remove the context, add it, because it's pretty important context. But again, what's really interesting, you've got certain groups of people in society that say, we want equality. We don't. You want privilege. You don't want equality. Oh, if you really wanted equality, you'd want it on an even playing field, in with the good and the bad and all that. No, you want privilege. There's plenty of radical feminists, should we say, that have been very it needs to stay. It needs to stay as something that only can be perpetrated by a penis, because the vast majority of it is committed by men. But again, it's committed by men because it's worded. It's like a vicious circle. And so I think that
Wait, they actually wanted to stay?
You what, sorry?
They wanted to stay.
Oh, yeah. There's plenty of people that want the actual offence to stay because they say that, well, no, it's all ideology and there's not really much logic behind it. The only response I can remember getting from people was saying that we need to keep it as it is because... well, actually, it's something that a man does to a woman. Yeah, because that's how it's worded. So we don't want to take anything away. We just want it reworded legally so that it can be perpetrated by men and women. And Siobhan Weir from the University of Lancaster, I think it is, did some research on this a few years ago called Forced to Penetrate, how women... and some men as well, are forcing male victims to penetrate them. And the case that she was putting forward was that should also be included and the definition should be changed. But I think the interesting thing is if you look at what we learned from America, the CDC, from their National Intimate Partner Sexual Violence Survey, I think that's what it's called, the last few years that the data has been released, certainly from 2010 onwards, I think, there have been similar, and in some cases more, men disclosing being forced to penetrate than women disclosing more. I think one year it was something like 1,200,000 women disclosed to the survey they'd been raped. 1,900,000 men said they'd been forced to penetrate. So for me, I'm thinking, well, what are they doing in America that we're doing different in the UK? And one of the things, in my own opinion, is that they are asking the questions differently. They are asking, have you ever been forced to penetrate someone? That's very clear to understand. Whereas I think here in the UK, the Crime of England and Wales survey that we often use doesn't ask that question in the same way. And I think sometimes the wording matters. We need to straightforward, you ask a man, have you ever been a victim of domestic abuse? He'll go, no. Has your wife or girlfriend ever hit you when you said she didn't look nice in that dress or whatever? Yeah. And then so you know what I mean? So the wording really matters.
Yeah. Going back to Eleanor Williams for a second, and we'll close out on this. What would you say or do to basically show people that false accusations is detrimental?
So there's lots of different ways. So I have a guy that I worked with a few years ago. He gave me permission where we did I don't know what you call it, a spider graph, where we looked at all the areas of his life and we put lines coming off each one and how they'd been affected because of the false allegations. And it's a really stunning, striking visual representation of how horrible the consequences can be. But I think that's the other thing. So in addition to the fact that it wastes police time, costs police money, they could be supporting genuine victims looking after crime and things like that, it's also about maybe, for me, carefully saying, do you not have a husband, a dad, a brother, a son, a good friend at work, a colleague, a neighbour? How would you feel if he was accused of something that you know, and how you know, I don't know, that he hadn't done? He's tried to kill himself. He's lost his job. He's sunk into a pit of depression. He's worried he might go to prison. He's lost his friends, all of this. And then later on, it turns out that there's some sort of factual evidence that clearly proves he did not do it. How do you think he's going to feel? And how will you feel then? And what if it was you? What if it was you? What if someone, for whatever reason, they wanted revenge, they wanted attention, they wanted power, they wanted money, they wanted whatever. And to do that, they falsely accused you of doing something. How would you feel? Just imagine that the police knock on your door and say, we've had an allegation where you have done ... How would you feel in that moment? Yeah, and if someone's put on a fantastic performance where they're crying, they're making out they're really scared, they're really angry, they're really strong, they do all of that, and they do a brilliant job of convincing the police that this has actually happened, how will you feel knowing that this is going on, but you've not done this? How awful are you going to feel trying to deal with it? And then if people find out, and you go, but I haven't done it. It's lies. But they believe this person. How are you going to? So I think sometimes trying to encourage the empathy that way can be really useful. But it's simple. But all you need to do is do a bit of Googling and look at the cases all over the world of false allegations, of people that tried to take their own life, of people who spent time in jail cells, people who lost everything, how horrific the consequences were.
Going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of Martin Seeger's gamma bias, etc., we don't tend to say all women do that. We don't tend to say all women are, they commit this kind of crime. We don't even look at the recent case that just went on about that woman that killed so many children in the nursing ward. I forgot her name. Do you know what?
I think I know what you mean. I can't remember her name as well, but I think I know what you mean. Yeah.
But could you imagine if the narrative was, well, all women does this? We would be screaming misogyny. We'd be screaming like all of these things. And, this is why I like the work that you do in regards to like highlighting misandry, because like when you highlight it, it's not as if you're highlighting it to wine. You actually provide examples, and not just provide examples, but you actually provide the actual definition of it and what it actually means to be misandrous. And I admire you for using your platform to continue to raise this, because people actually believe it doesn't exist.
This crazy thing about it is people often say it doesn't exist and then display it straight after saying it. Or then they'll say misandry doesn't exist. Misandry only hurts feelings. Well, hang on, for it to hurt feelings, it needs to exist. So either it doesn't exist or it does exist and it hurts feelings. Which is it? And I think this is why,
do they not think that misogyny hurts feelings as well? So sorry. Anyway,
but even then it would be, well, actually misogyny does more than hurt feelings, whereas misandry just hurts feelings. Well, no, it's like a scale. So 0 to 10. 0 is like name calling, hurtful things, and 10 is like murder and all of that. Whereas what they'll do is these people will take the extreme end of harm, like murder against women, and assume it's always motivated by misogyny and say that's misogyny. And then they will compare that to the mild end of the scale, like name calling, and say that's all misandry is. That's a complete distortion. And what we often do, as I've said before, is that when harm against women or anything adverse against women, whether it's name calling, criticising them, all the way up to sexual assault and horrible violence, the narrative is always motivated by misogyny. But when you compare it to men, where there's name calling or murder, the narrative is then it's never misandry. Well, how do we know? We don't know. So when we had the terrible tragedy that unfolded in Bondi a few weeks ago, where the guy went on the rampage with the knife, we were all waiting, oh, here we go, the predictable misandry is going to come out, men are all evil, this is what men are like, all of that. And right on cue, that's exactly what happened, as we knew it would. And it was the case of, hang on, that one man running around doing the horrible things that he did, there were men trying to stop him. There were men trying to act as barriers. There was one man on the escalator, and it's thinking, hang on, there was more men that tried to do good in that incident, but we ignore that, and you're saying that the larger number of men that tried to help, they don't represent men in general, but the one man, what? That's ridiculous. It's just bad maths. So this is, it's kind of what we often see, isn't it? It's that, whatever men, the minority of men on the planet that do bad, that represents all men, but the larger number of men that do more good, that doesn't. Well, again, it's just poor maths. But yeah, misandry definitely exists. We can't say it doesn't, because it's an attitude. The definition of misandry is that it's an attitude. Now, we can debate how it influences certain things, but we can't say it doesn't exist, because it just does. It's like saying the sun doesn't exist. It's there. It's as simple as that. It's like someone said to me once, prove misandry exists. And I went, I hate men. I've proven it exists. There we go. Whether I do, you don't know if I'm telling the truth, but if we imagine that I'm telling the truth and that I generally do hate the demographic of men, and I've told you that, and it's true, I've just proved it exists. There you go. Simple as that. Now, how it influences things is a different issue, but we can't say it doesn't exist, because it factually does.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. And we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Phil, for saying that with me. Amazing conversation, and we definitely have to talk about this, because I really want to get into the nitty gritty and the technical aspects of your work and how you help these men overcome their abuse. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. It's on your screen, his face is Phil Mitchell 83. It's not that Phil Mitchell. If you watch Accusations, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, follow him. Make sure you. I think I'll also put his counseling services below, so that if you do need counseling for whatever reason, you can reach out to him, and because it's really important. If you listen to this and you feel any type of way, want to discuss anything, want to know more about this, Phil is a man. Phil is a guy. He knows way more about this. So yeah, check in the description. Thank you so much again, Phil, for saying that with me. And yeah, hopefully we'll pick this up again soon.
No, thanks for inviting me. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
If you would like extended coverage of cases that we cover, make sure you head over to our sister channel called Catch Up Court, where we go through trial watch, as well as reading filings and giving you comprehensive updates on legal cases. It's all happening over there. Make sure you hit subscribe on there, as well as on here, and hit the like button. I also would like to give a shout out to all the members that have signed up to Heinz. Every single one of you are so important, and that goes for Random Girl and Yelly Bean. I appreciate all of your contributions and for being members. New exclusive videos are coming right to Heinz Hall. We have also launched a Patreon service as well as a Discord, so do keep an eye out on that community tab, because I will be posting updates on there. If you like interviews, you can check out the latest one with a senior lecturer at Manchester Met University, as well as a playlist of all the interviews that I've done for the Deadly Heard docuseries. But in the meantime, I appreciate every single one of you for taking the time out to watch this video. Take care of yourself and have a great day. Bye bye.